we go live? And
we are now live.
Mock anybody in the audience that doesn't know what dim mock is.
Yeah, we're just pointing out that I have no idea what dim mock is.
And it is the death touch.
Okay.
Come on, man.
Not from like Kill Bill, though.
No, not the 5-finger.
Not the
5-point death touch.
Okay.
Just death touch.
Yeah, no.
Just straight up like pick a brick in the line and break the one that you want.
Hey, you guys are actually live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Awesome. We're talking about death touch.
Hey, everybody. This is Jeff with ReadyMan. This is our live show. We apologize. We're a little bit late getting started tonight because we got a special guest, Mike the Cop, that's here. And then, of course, Jason.
Which camera do I
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, he'll figure it out.
Don't try to keep track of it.
See the one in between? See the one in between the TVs? That one.
Yeah.
We're going to have a cool discussion tonight, but before we get too far, Zach, hit it. And we're back. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're going live. The reason why we're a little bit late is because we're doing some,
You're going to
Zach.
blame it on me?
Yeah,
Zach,
No,
wait a
under
second.
the bus.
I'm saying
No, it's Zach's fault.
No, actually,
me
I was
again.
going to give you a compliment. I was going to say
really?
Zach was doing some of his black magic back there, and we're actually going live
Oh, I gotta share this on
simultaneously on Mike the Cop's page as well as ours. So, and we can see all of you guys' comments and who's tuning in. So you guys ask your questions, and hopefully we'll get to them. There's a flurry of questions that are coming up there. But we've got Jason, the co-author of Black Autumn, up here, as well as The Last Air Force One, Black Autumn Travelers. And if you haven't seen it yet, The Beginner's Guide.
This is a kick-ass book. This is
Emergency
There you go.
survival
10
preparedness.
easy steps for less money than fire insurance. So this is like, if you like wonder where to start in terms of emergency survival
This is it.
preparedness, we just wrote that book to answer that question.
And, of course, we've got our special guest tonight, Mike the Cop. Mike?
Hey, I'm sharing the live stream to my page. I
phone
look
is
so disinterested in what you guys are like.
You're such a
whatever.
millennial, Mike.
Preparedness. Anyway, I got to share this.
Hold on, Instagram.
So I'm
Snapchat.
almost there. I'm actually like really bad at technology, so I'm like trying to figure where's my page. Oh, it's Mike the Cop. Okay.
So tonight what we're talking about is cops confiscating guns. And so we thought it fitting we'd have Mike come on. Mike the Cop, he's a current police officer up in Detroit, Motor City, as well as myself, former military guy, former police officer as well. And then Jason,
Chief bullshitter.
Chief BSer, but tends to ask really thought-provoking questions to make you go, all right, I hadn't thought of that. And so, Mike, tell us, some of the folks out there don't know who you are, so introduce yourself.
Got into law enforcement in 2009, and somewhere along the way, about like 2014 maybe, I started blogging and sharing some of my thoughts and experiences, and that led to forming a nonprofit, Humanizing the Badge, or having a hand in that anyway. I certainly don't take credit for it all. And then making videos as a way to like draw attention to our nonprofit. And then Mike the Cop was born, or exposed to the world. I don't know how it's like. I'm just myself. I'm not really an actor or anything. I just like started putting my own experiences into short video format, and here we are.
And it's great. It's great humor. It definitely puts the human side to a lot of police officers as well as emergency workers, because he brings a lot of humor, and it's like, okay, these guys are humans too. So
Sometimes saying what they can't say, maybe.
yeah.
Policy-wise.
Based off of the videos.
I remember the last department I was at, like the current chief now, he's the director now. He was the chief then. He came to me and said, like, so what would happen if we told you, like, you had to stop doing this? And I was like, I would walk out front and make a video about how you told me I had to stop doing this. He's like, you would? I'm like, I absolutely would. Like, then I'd be like, that's the only way I could survive is to make videos about it, you know?
So in a sense, we'd make fun of you.
Yeah, exactly.
We made fun of you. All in good humor, all in gentlemanly good taste, and
Why'd you point to me when you said gentlemanly good taste?
because that's your
my riff, right?
yeah, that's your MO.
That's so exciting.
It's like, hey, let's be gentlemen about this.
All right. Speaking of which, we've had like 19. They went right to killing cops. I mean, like, we have like Adrian. You have to post that again. There it is. If I kill a cop trying to take my guns, is it murder? Defending my rights. I mean, that's where we're going. Not necessarily to this question about shooting cops. Please, guys, let's not go there. But talking about if someone comes to take your guns, who's it likely to be? Are we talking police officers, military, and what's our moral or our citizen obligation, and how likely is that even to happen?
Oh,
well,
man.
I'm not asking that. I mean, I just threw it all out there. I just threw it all out there. Where do we start with that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think I approach it from like a slippery slope sort of an angle. I look at the gun rights, as crazy as it sounds, as much as I do privacy rights, and think about the fact that like you have thousands of people that will line up, that will camp out and sleep at night to get one of these things in my hand right here, right? The iPhones, like the next one, they will exchange days of their life to get this piece of technology that can be very, very invasive, right? And as long as like, oh, I don't care, as long as I can have my iPhone and my latte, the rest is sort of like details, right, that I don't care about. And I think that
that ship has sailed. I mean, if what you're saying is anything like gun rights, we're screwed. Because
I think it's comparable.
Remember in the like 90s, 80s and 90s, privacy was like a thing. We were like super pissed off about the possibility that our privacy would be impaired.
Yeah.
But through over 8 years, I watched people of the Obama administration, I watched people kind of look at each other and say, does this matter? And we all sort of looked at each other and said, screw it.
Yeah.
And our privacy is like vaporized both in corporate terms through social media as well as through government, as well as through credit reporting as well. That ship has sailed. I mean,
I just feel like we're in a similar position with the Second Amendment and gun rights. I think like we're sitting in this position where we give an inch and we lose a mile, you know, like where it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really affect me per se, but in a bigger spectrum, we might be really sliding in a direction that I don't like to see.
So it's like when it comes to privacy, you're like, well, this is more convenient. We can buy a little bit more convenience in exchange for a whole bunch of our rights. Hell, let's take the convenience.
Right.
And for folks who aren't gun owners or who've given up on protecting themselves and their families, what really do they have to lose?
I think they have all their rights to lose, right? So like this is if there was a linchpin inside the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment has a pretty good case for being that pin, right? That if you pull that out, everything else can start to fall apart, because that stands between us and a government or other power that may want to come in and remove other rights.
Does anyone out there know, just post it up here, I'll be looking, or one of us will be looking for it. When did Venezuela give up their right to give up the common ownership of firearms? They probably never had a constitutional right to.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
When did Venezuela? Because I saw something today that said 5 years ago. I don't know if I believe that because it was on the interwebs. But
it was in a meme. It's got to be true.
It was in a meme.
It's got to be true.
But we ran a meme. We ran a meme on the ReadyMan group, which by the way you're all invited to join ReadyMan group. So we ran a meme and we closed comments for it because we didn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole before our live feed. But it said, without the Second Amendment, with the Second Amendment, it showed the Bundy Standoff, where a bunch of federal agents as well as citizens kind of hanging on to guns, some pointed at each other. Yeah. And then it said, without the Second Amendment, it showed that MRAP driving over a bunch of Venezuelans who couldn't do anything but throw rocks. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how long ago did Venezuela give up their guns? Yeah, someone says 2012. So yeah, 2012. That would be 7 years ago. A whole bunch of people said 2012. So you're saying it's a linchpin. And how fast do you think it begins to fall apart when you pull that linchpin?
I think some of the early signs are already there in some places. I don't know how far we are from here to what everyone fears, like a door-to-door sort of like confiscation. Maybe faster than we think. I being in law enforcement 10 years and knowing the cops that I know and knowing the cops that I've met over that decade, like literally thousands, I've got to say that we're very, very far from local law enforcement cooperation and something like that.
Even in cities, even in big cities like Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, cops tend toward the conservative side of things, especially when it comes to constitutional issues. They tend toward that. So, I don't know. Maybe we were talking off camera earlier about like these pockets of maybe like cultural experiences in places that broadly in their pocket of the world see things a little bit differently. But man, I don't know. There's so many sheriffs that have come out and said, like, if this ever comes down even from a federal level, they're going to have to come make us do it. We're gonna have a fight on our hands. Even this is law enforcement saying to the federal government, like, good luck. We're not enforcing anything like that.
Yeah, what happens when police officers start getting shot at somebody's doorstep because they went in and took? Because I have a friend who at one time worked for the California DOJ, and his job was to run around and kick in the doors of felons who they knew had firearms and take their firearms. Now these are felons.
Yeah.
Right. And we're generally speaking, I have not seen the NRA or any other pro-gun rights groups come out and say, no, felons should have firearms. Sorry. I mean, I've seen a couple individuals say that. So what's that difference between kicking in the door and taking a gun from a felon or a red flag law, which is now in how many states do we have red flag laws? It's a lot.
Yeah. What exactly, I mean, how much different are the red flag laws between the different states? Are they all pretty much?
Well, let's define what they are.
Well, I was going to ask you, what are you defining as a red flag law? Because in my world, nothing has changed, right? So there's been nothing new, at least in the state of Michigan, that has come across that has impacted me in any way.
So could you before, when someone calls and say, hey, I think my dad's going to commit suicide, he just told me he just wrote a note, come take his guns. Could you have done that before?
No, not in a straightforward way like that. Not like, oh, hey, someone said you're suicidal, I'm taking your guns. So what law enforcement would do would be go to that call. Let's say, for example, that someone did say, something pops into my head right away. Marine vet, right? Someone calls concerned about this guy. We show up. He comes out. We know for a fact, because of experience, we know this guy's got a boatload of guns in his house. Okay, I know that they exist in there. He comes out, plus he's got like 5 pit bulls in his house or whatever. Like, this guy's like, kind of the anti-police sort of a dude, but he's suicidal. He's really struggling, PTSD, whatever else. We knew him by name. We have this conversation out in his front yard. Long story short, our hands get tied a little bit with the knowledge that someone wants to hurt themselves or others, right? So we have to do something. Typically, that means we're going to take them to an approved location where they can be checked in, whether by voluntarily or we check them in.
So what happened to his guns?
Hole. Nothing.
So they just stayed in the house while he was taken away.
The only way for us to take a gun in those situations would be court order. So let's say that you punched your wife in the face and got arrested for domestic violence, if that was the case. A judge may say, while you're out on bond or as a part of the judgment process, we're going to remove the guns from the home until this case is adjudicated, because there's been probable cause that violence has occurred, and we're going to reduce the risks of that escalating in that situation.
I gotcha.
So if that counts as a red flag law, then I guess I've seen that, but it hasn't. There's no law that I'm aware of. I certainly have never enforced it, if it exists, to where someone says so-and-so's suicidal and I go and take their guns.
I think it varies from state to state, right? The ones I've actually read, the red flag laws I've actually read, said that the police can, say, take firearms for a period of 72 hours or they can take them until such time as a judge can weigh in on it. So it's one step further, and I'm sure it's different in various states. Probably way worse in California, way better in Colorado.
Sure,
but where police officers can come in when there's a certain level of evidence, they can take these guns, hang on to them.
Well, I mean, but let's draw a parallel here, and I'm in. So you guys out there, before you beat me up. It's like I'm just drawing something to make you go, maybe we need to think, because it's not as clear cut as what you think. So we look at the Parkland shooter. So the police had been to his house how many times?
A bunch.
He had been to his house like numerous times. He had come under investigation with the FBI, and they didn't do anything. And then he went and shot up a high school. And then everybody's screaming about, well, why didn't you do something?
Sure.
Because he was known to be, and so I think that's where for us, where we've got to go, well, okay, what is the answer? I'm not saying that I have the answer, and I'm firmly against confiscating guns, but it's also you've got this weird duplicity that's taking place where it's like, on one hand, it's like, if you come to take my guns, then I'm going to fight to the death, and anybody else. But on the other hand, people are screaming from the rooftops, because here's this kid that murdered a whole bunch of other kids, and the police had been to his house multiple times, and they didn't do anything about it. And so you end up with the police that are stuck in the middle and going, well, I mean, we're following what the accepted law is, the rule of law.
So, I mean, we're not taking any kind of position on red flag laws, and really, someone out there I just saw this. I think it was a significant number of states had red flag laws already passed. Someone here just said Colorado has a really severe one on the being voted on right now. How many states have red flag laws as it stands, where without a court order, a police officer or police officers can take your guns for a period of time?
See, I don't understand that, though. Is how can you do that without a court order?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there has to be some really exigent circumstances.
Yeah,
there.
because that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
It's proof. So if someone could say, look, he just posted this on Facebook, go get his guns. He said, I'm going to shoot up my school, go get his guns. And the police could.
But even still, you would have to go into somebody's house. I mean, that's the Fourth Amendment. And going in there, even with circumstances like that, I mean, now you've got somewhat circumstantial evidence that's taking place. You've got to be able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt before you remove somebody.
That's not a red flag law. Is squishy in the middle. It's like, it's on the front end,
and that's where I'd say they're going to lose eventually, because it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Do we have anyone on here who has enforced a red flag law? Anyone who's I mean, I've seen
Someone
plenty.
Says the Colorado red flag law was just signed into law.
Oh, it was just signed.
Yeah.
I've seen stories.
I'm not seeing like my channel's comment if anybody's adding to the.
Yeah, I bet on your channel someone would know. And I've also seen news stories where people were shot in the process of enforcing a red flag gun seizure.
Yeah, I think that was Maryland,
somewhere in the northeast. Yeah.
See, and that's where I kind of see where they're going to run into. Ultimately, somebody's going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a pretty stiff. Yeah, because I mean, think about it like this. Law enforcement can't use thermal imagery to track vehicles and grows for marijuana in states where they've got, or tracking vehicles for that matter with thermal imagery. You can't go up. This was Justice Scalia. You can't go up and put your hand on the vehicle to see if the engine is still warm without a warrant, because it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment right. There is no way that when these things stand before the Supreme Court, they're going to hold water. You have got to have a warrant.
Not this Supreme Court, maybe.
Well, I don't know, because the problem you run into is the Supreme Court's pretty good at seeing slippery slopes. And so with this, I mean, I think it'll be, I mean, that ruling held for thermal imagery looking at grow houses.
But guns has been a different play.
Someone had said in here that cops should just uphold their oath, for the Constitution, to support and uphold the Constitution. And I agree with that. But the issue is, people have to understand that when we talk about, we uphold the Constitution. If it was just up to, you wouldn't want me to be the arbiter of exactly the interpretation of how the Constitution is to be lived out in modern day society, right? So like, you don't want me deciding that, because this is everybody we're talking about, not Mike's way of doing it. And I think what people miss is there is a presupposition in that sentence. You should uphold the Constitution. Yes, I don't disagree with you. The issue comes in is when the courts that the Constitution itself makes provision for to interpret the law, that has an impact on what we enforce and how it's enforced. So it's not as simple as just saying, we'll just enforce the Constitution no matter what the court says, because the courts and the Constitution are woven together.
Exactly.
It's not this monolithic thing that we each get to appropriate to our own ideology.
So to say it's Constitution isn't enough.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the balance of powers. That's why we've got, the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. So the fact of the matter is, if you don't like the laws, get rid of the politician, get rid of the legislator that is voting these laws in.
Absolutely.
I mean,
so that makes sense to a point, because now we need to start breaking down the nation at least by states, because you're talking red flag laws, you're talking about how gun laws are enforced. That is totally state by state basis.
For sure.
Almost always state by state law enforcement. So if you live in California and you think their 2A laws suck, which pretty much I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
Anybody who enjoys the Second Amendment as a right can't like California very
or
much.
DC or
right.
or New York. And so the opportunity is always there to leave and to place yourself somewhere where you can tolerate. So we have that so the nation, if you want to see it as a patchwork quilt of different enforcement on the Second Amendment, that is purely accurate.
Yeah.
And so there's always that. We can bust this down, and we've even had municipalities now enacting gun control legislation.
Yeah, and again, that's where it goes back to. I mean, look at who's passing the laws. I mean, your sheriff is an elected official. Your chief of police is a political official. Mm-hmm. Your city, state legislators, elected officials. Your congressman and your senator that goes back to the federal government back in D.C., elected officials. So if you don't like the laws that they're passing, unelect them. Congress comes up every 2 years. Congress has got to fight for their job. Get rid of them if they're not passing the laws that you like.
And arguably, that's exactly what happened with this last presidential election.
Absolutely.
So let's hit the nail on the head. Just Mike, police officers that you know and have met, a straight up confiscation order of firearms. What like we're seeing, if I'm not mistaken, in New Zealand. What percentage of police officers would do that?
It failed miserably.
Like, give us a number. What percentage do you think?
If I had to guess, I would say
refuse?
Like less than 9 out of 10.
Right,
less than one. Well, I guess I should phrase it differently. Less than 1 out of every 10 cops would ever do that.
A straight up enforce. Now, we're not talking red flag laws or talking to this guy who's on his lawn telling you he's suicidal. We're talking about straight up confiscation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have said publicly, and I stand by that. If an order came down, or even if it became law to you, in order to enforce the law, what we're going to assign you to do, what you are going to do is go confiscate guns. I would just simply set the badge and the gun on the desk, and I would go home to the guns that I have outside of the one that's issued to me. Right. So like, that's it. Like, no, not going to happen. And I know from a decade of conversations with law enforcement officers that it's fairly universal. In fact, I don't personally know a cop that I've ever had a conversation with who would feel otherwise. Now, push comes to shove. Some people can talk a big game, and then all of a sudden, like, well, I want to feed my family, so I'm gonna go ahead and just do this because I need a job. I don't need a job that bad. Whatever. I'll just.
Well, and what happens the moment? So let's say this is a straight up extra constitutional gun seizure, and then the first 8 or 10 cops are shot in your home city, at that point, it really changes the game. Now everybody's looking at everybody and say, wait.
It's a whole, yeah, exactly. It's
Whole nother conversation than when we're talking hypotheticals.
Yep.
Okay, Jeff, operators, former operators, SOF guys who are in SF, guys who are in, Navy SEALs, et cetera. What percentage of those guys would enforce a confiscation order?
Back in the 90s, we actually took a survey when I was up in Washington at Group, and they passed around a survey, and it went to all the Special Forces groups where they said, this was 1990, it was like 1993 or 1994, and they basically, it went out to all the Special Forces groups, and they said, how many of you, and it was a totally anonymous survey, they were like, how many of you, if directed by the president, would go around and confiscate guns? The backlash was so extreme that they basically were like, we're sorry, we won't ask them. Because guys not only will I not go and confiscate guns, but I will fight any entity that asks me to do so. And so, and it was like, oh, okay.
Do you think that's changed with time as we've professionalized?
No, I don't think it's changed at all, because that same type of freedom-loving person understands as soon as you've been overseas, you quickly understand, okay, these are the reasons why we're a free country. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment. You take the top 10 amendments, which is what essentially makes us who we are and what we are as a free country. And in anybody who's been overseas, it doesn't take them very long to go, man, that is truth incarnate.
So, but don't forget, there's one extra step for the military, and that would be Posse Comitatus. So you'd have to, number one, throw away Posse Comitatus, and then number two, throw away the Second Amendment. So it's really obvious when you start asking operators to go seize people's guns that we've just shit-canned the Constitution.
Yeah,
whereas a police officer, there's no Posse Comitatus issue.
And even in Iraq, Afghanistan, and when I was in Haiti back in the 90s on Uphold Democracy, when we were doing Uphold Democracy, the name of the game was disarm the populace. We stopped because all we were doing is we were disarming good citizens, and realized that then the thugs, the Tantamakut, was going in and murdering these people. And it was like, oh my gosh, we've got to stop doing this. So we left, and then in Afghanistan and Iraq, people could have guns in their house. And obviously that led to some other problems because they'd come out and use the guns and shoot at us and stuff. But there were also, just like here in the United States, there were a lot of good citizens that were over there that were using the guns to defend themselves from either the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, as well as to keep the peace in their own little areas of where they were out in their villages. Guns save lives.
Yeah, there's obviously, I think we at this table, and probably the vast majority of people watching this, are going to agree that there is zero logical or common sense practical reason why law-abiding normal people shouldn't have as many guns as they want, of any variety. That's my take. Like, there's really no reason to think otherwise. So
you've been a federal law enforcement officer.
Yeah, no.
Federal law enforcement officers. Okay, so we've talked about local PD, we've talked about military. Federal law enforcement officers, how likely are they to enforce, in your experience, a seizure?
One of the biggest things that you learn as a federal agent is without the support of the local law enforcement, you're dead in the water. Unless it's some weird outside entity thing that you're doing, maybe like the FBI doing counterintelligence. But even then, if you don't have the support of the local populace, you're dead in the water. So even if you wanted to be tyrannical, it's like, and federal law enforcement is tiny. It's tiny. So it's like, what are they going to be able to affect? And not only that, just because you're a federal law enforcement agent does not mean that you're immune from local law enforcement.
Well, let's talk about, and I kind of promised we wouldn't go talk about the legal justification of that Bundy standoff in Nevada, right? It was Nevada. But here we had, a bunch of armed citizens staring at a bunch of armed federal agents, and the federal agents blinked this time.
Yeah, the federal agents were like, this ain't worth it. We're going
We know
home.
people who were there.
Yeah.
And what happened?
And essentially, long story short, it was, this isn't worth bloodshed. We're going home.
Which is ideally where we'd land. Of course, we didn't land there in Ruby Ridge or Waco, but
And it was this isn't worth bloodshed on either side. So we're going home. Bye, everybody. Great.
Have your dozen cows.
Enjoy. Have your dozen cows. That's fine. We're going home.
We've had several people now fire back on your comment about, hey, just elect someone who isn't hostile toward guns. And a lot of people saying, well, Illinois is screwed. There's no kind of vote you're ever going to, they're saying there's no way to defend our gun rights in my given state. Other people saying voting doesn't work that way anymore. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yeah, but because we're not a democracy. We're a representative republic.
Yes.
I mean, democracies are mobocracies. We are not a democracy. We are a representative republic.
But I would argue we've become more of a democracy given social media. Just this last social media attack on shootings and on our gun rights have eroded our gun rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about it, our system of government that is in place is designed to slow things down. I can think of almost nothing, 99% of cases that are out there, I can think of almost nothing where the federal government or any government needs to move fast. Outside of law enforcement protecting people, that's why I say almost nothing. I can think of no instance, including war, where we have to move fast.
So, yeah, you're arguing that this slow process, but still we're going to have people say that we're being forced. Some people are, if they have to stay in Illinois or they have to stay in New York or they have to stay in California for whatever reason, they're saying I'm being forced to choke down gun laws that are anti-constitutional that I don't like.
And that's where I'd go. I'm a firm believer that the 2A is there, not so much to protect us from a tyrannical government, but to protect us from our neighbors, who then would become a tyrannical government. And historically speaking, that is exactly what we've seen over and over again. The Nazis didn't own the government when they were going around bashing stuff in there. The guns were there. And the Nazis took in, and so is the Bolsheviks, and so the Cultural Revolution in China, and the and the People's Revolution in Iran, where they were disarming. Those were in Rwanda is another great example. Those were citizens, those were neighbors that needed to protect themselves from neighbors. And after they had gotten rid of or trampled down enough of their neighbors, they then took control of the government that was there.
Yeah, I just looked up the stats. Take it or leave it for
people were
accuracy.
getting on your ass, by the way, for looking at your phone while
I was looking up a stat. Yeah, I'm looking up, I was curious what was the percentage of voters who voted in 2016 compared to registered voters. It was around 58%. I looked at 3 different quick stats. They ranged from mid 50s to mid 60s. So, take it for what it's worth on a quick look. If that's at all accurate, then I think what Jeff is saying holds true. Well, then shut up and go vote. If people aren't voting, then that's on you. Vote then for the people that are going to. And I think people get lost in the federal elections as opposed to the local ones where it matters. You have to take an interest in how this impacts you locally.
And gun laws, we're seeing more and more gun actions in cities, municipalities.
Yes, absolutely.
And HOAs.
Yes. There's been in Massachusetts and Illinois, there's been municipalities making votes on banning assault weapons, right? Like AR-15 style military weapons, however they phrase it. And that's at a local level. And you're like, well, how can that possibly pass muster? Well, it might not if it goes up the chain, but it starts somewhere.
I lived in Seattle for a long time, and then I lived in Portland.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, tell me about it. So I lived in Seattle.
Did they let you carry a knife in your pocket?
No, and Seattle.
Can't even look at somebody angrily.
Portland, Oregon, 2 very, very liberal cities, and I'll tell you what. Every election cycle, it did not matter who was getting elected. It could be the dude for the friggin' dog catcher was getting elected. There were people on the street corner with signs saying, get out there and vote. Yeah. If we had a drop of that on the conservative side, we wouldn't have any problems. Zach, have we got a question?
Actually, yeah, this segues perfectly into a question that Harry had, which is, so apparently the Portland Police Department have stated they are no longer responding to calls due to such anti-police public outcry. What would be the proper response?
Not responding to any calls?
To this.
It was some kind of calls. I saw that too. What did that really mean?
So I looked it up, and it's to service calls out in Portland, like legitimate service calls. And I guess so. Assuming that that's true,
doesn't make any sense. They would just cease to exist,
right? So
I don't know what they're not responding to.
We'll pretend for a second that it's true, right? Just 100% no calls. What would be the proper response then from enforcement for this?
There would be no enforcement of it if it's a real thing.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know, like it'd be great if there was departments that would stop responding to certain things that people call the police for. It'd be great, but. Man, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what they're talking about with Portland.
Yeah, I have to read more into that. Maybe somebody can comment and follow up.
Someone said not the Portland police, the sheriff.
That's right. That's what
there
it was.
There we go.
It was the sheriff no longer responding. They're kicking it back to the PD.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
That makes far more sense.
I saw it online too. I didn't know what the heck.
Like straight up anarchy over there.
So at what point? All right. I mean. So we're talking about when you look at Malfleur, which has been mentioned here, as well as the Bundy Standoff, as well as Waco, as well as Ruby Ridge. At what point do we shit can the rule of law and say the Constitution is totally broken? I mean, I see stuff from 3%ers every single day, and a lot of times what they're saying is, look, we're already past that point. The rule of law is now in the crapper. Now it's time for revolution. I mean, you're talking about a very small minority right now in the United States, even given red flag laws, even given banning bump stocks. At what point can we look across the table at a man and say, yeah, that's dead now. That whole Constitution thing is dead now. Now it's time to shoot people who step onto my lawn trying to take away my rights.
Well, I would say the first thing is, what are you replacing it with? So does it come to rule a gun? I mean, if we dissolve the Constitution, if we act like it's dissolved, act like it's dissolved, we're no better than half the countries in Africa.
Well, that's what the Bundys were doing. I mean, they were saying, "Hey, no, I'm now going to shoot at law enforcement. I don't care about my judicial remedies. I'm going to drill that guy if he walks over that line, that federal law enforcement agent." At what point is that justified? Can we look at each other as men of honor and say that is now broken beyond repair? I prefer that anarchy to this order.
Well, I think anybody that says they prefer that anarchy have never seen that anarchy.
Yeah.
And I lived in that anarchy for 13 years. And I tell you what, you don't want it here. You don't want it here because you know who takes over? The very people that you think that you're getting rid of.
But even you would say at some point, yes.
Yeah.
But what is that point? You know, is it gun confiscation, just broad gun I mean, I'm not asking you guys to take a position. I'm throwing out the question.
I think if
there is a point.
Yeah, there is. There absolutely there is. And I mean, is it the frog that gets slowly boiled? Or are you an ounce of prevention? You know, and I think, again, the Founding Fathers were genius in what they came up with in the Constitution of the Bill of Rights is they figured it all out. So probably the solution is get out and vote.
Well, and I think some people would argue that the Bundy Stand, especially given, I mean, where has this been now and through the courts, the Bundys in the courts? I think there was 2 mistrials.
Yeah, well, the trials are over. They're done.
That's it. They're done.
Yeah.
So they took this stand, this extrajudicial stand to say, my gun's going to speak for me now, not my lawyer. And essentially, the court systems back them on that. I mean, just essentially the citizen juries, correct? These were juries that were mistrials were hung jury. Am I correct?
I believe so.
So what were they wrong?
Doesn't seem like it.
Right, based on the Constitution, it doesn't seem like they were.
I mean, they took their stand. The government stepped in. I mean, I think that there's that gray area, at least in that circumstance, and so you end up in this gray area where everybody's doing what they believe to be right at the time. They decided, as we already mentioned, that is this really worth it? Is this worth pursuing? And then when you did hash it out in the courts, well, it worked out. It's kind of an example of probably the most extreme in modern times of pushing that boundary, and we see that the rule of law prevailed.
Oh, and
Really?
Ruby Ridge 2.
Well, there's a
and Ruby Ridge 2 cut, but when it was fully analyzed through the court system, Ruby Ridge didn't cut way against the feds. If I remember correctly, that was so long ago.
there's a great I don't know what you'd call it now, meme or something now that says, what do you call a Democrat who's been mugged? A Republican. What do you call a Republican who's been through the legal system?
A libertarian?
A libertarian.
Wait, how do you get to become a liberal? You're just young? What do you call somebody who's in college? A liberal.
A liberal. Yeah.
Now, a lot of libertarians breathe down my neck about, well, you can't be a libertarian and be a police. I'm more of an independent. I'm just like an independent thinker. I don't belong to any particular political party. I mean, I would probably closely align with libertarians, but they always breathe down my neck because how can you be a police officer and claim, you enforce unjust laws like taxes? And I'm like, man, you don't understand a local police officer's job in the first place if you think I have anything to do with taxes.
Yeah.
So, but it's a whole like conflation of
Help us
arguments.
understand a local police officer's job. I was told by a friend of mine who's local SWAT. He said, "Look, you don't understand. We don't stop crime from happening. We show up after crime has happened and we take a report, and maybe something comes out of that."
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, I would say that as a statement probably varies from place to place, circumstance to circumstance, staffing levels or whatever else. Because there's absolutely, for sure, like there was 12-hour days where I didn't stop doing anything but respond. But there was also times where, you're going down the street and you see someone that looks out of place, or however you come into contact with this person, and it turns out, oh yeah, this is the guy that's been breaking into cars. So you did prevent crime because that guy was there about ready to do it again. So I wouldn't go as far as to say they don't prevent any crime. I think that an aggressive patrol presence, and when I say aggressive, I'm not talking about in the violence, I'm talking about in the awareness of the public eye and being in and active in your community, aggressive in that sense, does prevent crime, because there would be people like, I know that I don't want to shoot up heroin in that city and get caught. I know that I don't want to steal a car from these people because they will chase me until the tires fall off their patrol cars, and then I'm going to go to jail. So they're not stealing cars in our town anymore. So like aggressive in that sense. So I wouldn't go that far. But for the most part, the local PD is basically an expression of what those property tax payers, because that's where our salary comes from. So I always love it when people, like, I pay your tax. No, you don't. You don't pay my salary. You live 5 towns over. You don't pay anything. You have nothing. Your money never makes it to me. Only the property owners, business and personal residential people, their property taxes help pay for municipal services. So I'm paid out of that. And what happens there is an expression of what that community is concerned about in great part, because you mentioned earlier, police chiefs, they're politicians. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely true. You're elected. You're appointed by politicians, a mayor, a city council. You're not in a police union. You're not like some labor protected person anyway. You're sort of like this middle of the stuck in the middle kind of a character, right? So if people in a community say, we are tired of people jaywalking at this intersection when I drive home from work, I'm tired of it, and then the cops are out there enforcing jaywalking laws, people are like, oh, you're just nothing better to do than jaywalking. You're right. I do have nothing better to do right now. You know why? Because the people that do tell me what I have to do told me this is what I have to do, right? So like, this is what this community cares about, and I'm out there, so that's going to vary so crazy all over the country depending on communities.
Do you as I had no idea until you mentioned it earlier, and I forgot to ask, do you take an oath to defend the Constitution as a police officer?
Yes, to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, and in my case, the state of Michigan, and the local laws and ordinances of a city where I'm in.
All right, so I listened to my son being sworn in as a Marine, and I noticed he swore to 2 things: one, to defend the Constitution; the other, to follow orders of the, I think, Commander-in-Chief is how it's stated, the President. So that doesn't, of course, resolve the question of what happens when those 2 things conflict. Mm-hmm. Right? That's still hanging out there.
Well, there's the rub, right? Because who gets to decide if the order given is against the Constitution? And I'm not suggesting that there's not a plain common sense answer when you look at these things. Like from if someone's saying, you know what, we don't want guns in our town anymore. I want you to go down on this block and knock on the doors and get all the guns you can. Like I can look at that prima facie and say, that's unconstitutional.
But when President Trump says, go collect all the bump stocks, which he didn't say, but you know, bump stocks,
well, I mean,
I believe have been
bump
illegal.
stocks are stupid anyway, but yeah. They're illegal.
Well, but, you know, and I think so too. Have you ever shot a bump stock, by the way?
One time, yeah.
Yeah, right.
What's
me too.
the point?
Yeah, what's the point? But nonetheless, I think a lot of people would say the point is that it's a firearm accessory. It's a piece of a firearm. You can't throw it away without affecting all of us negatively. Slippery slope.
I agree.
Where the hell was I going with that? Well, so when a police officer is ordered to do that, it isn't obvious that isn't obviously an incursion on the Second Amendment.
Yeah, we have to go with how that's played out in the courts. I think. I mean, that's the balances of powers. Like, I mean, we have to have some way to, if an executive branch is saying this is what we're going to do, well, that's why we have the checks and balances in our system, you know. And sometimes police officers, in theory at least, would be the whipping boys. Like, they just like get the brunt of however it plays out, you know, as far as what they're supposed to enforce. But
and that's the rub, is if you don't like the laws, don't take it out on the police officers, take it out on the legislators. Go stand on their front lawn.
Now, I use discretion a ton, right?
Well, of course.
Where you have discretion, I use it, right? I've done that with all kinds of situations where I could arrest someone, but that's not necessarily the best decision. I could give a ticket to someone, but that doesn't seem to be the wisest thing to do in this circumstance, you know? So, I mean... And
in other times, you'll enforce the hell out of a DeMinimis law just because you know it's in everybody's best interest. It seems obvious to you.
Or we know for a variety of reasons that the use of that law gets us to something bigger that we have, you know, reason to believe we need to act on that. Alex
on the comment said a moment ago, well, yeah, but what if the court tells you to seize the gun? And I think you answered that.
Yeah, I know for me personally, there comes a line where I have, I think, moral convictions, you know, about these things, to where I simply would remove myself from the equation, you know, where I have to make that personal decision. Like, you know what, if this is the direction that our country is going, and it means if I'm going to be in law enforcement that I have to abide by that, I'm out. You know, like I feel like there's a point that could come to where I make that decision. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, and you've said earlier in the show, for those who are just signing on, that 90% of the police officers you know in a clear gun confiscation, clear general firearm confiscation action would bow out.
Yeah, for sure.
Would refuse the order.
I think the majority of them would. And we have sheriffs of very large counties already coming out saying, like, yeah, bring it. Like, not happening here.
And I suppose it kind of comes down to that. It's a localized issue. I mean, you could be looking at a broken constitution in some states.
Yeah, I think that's the way to look at it. I mean, essentially, we've got 50 different experiments that are going on. I mean, that was the original intention. And some of them are going to fail. You know, there's going to be booms and there's going to be busts. And some of them are going to fail, and they're going to have to self-right. You know, and the number one way that they self-right is people vote. They either vote by going to the polls, or they vote with their feet and they go, I'm taking my tax dollars somewhere else.
I've always long said, like, you know what? California has a beautiful coastline. It's amazing stuff. You know what? Even Oregon and Washington, you know what? Just give anybody that wants the, you know, fully socialized healthcare, no guns, all of the free speech that could be labeled as hate speech to be completely regulated. You want to give up your First and Second Amendment, all that. Just give them the entire West Coast states. Let it go a decade. they'll all be ravenous and devour one another, and those that are left alive would be like, yeah, you guys got any money? and we just step back over and take it back.
Yeah, well, and
it'll take 10 years. And
California, Oregon, and Washington, the significant majority of those states are actually rural.
Yeah.
So those poor bastards who are the red-blooded farmers
The flyover
in
states.
eastern Washington are like, shit, how am I getting drug along with Seattle?
That's the push. I mean, Seattle or Washington and California have all had like pieces that want to separate and create their own states, because it's like, you guys don't represent us, but you outvote us because you have the population base, and we want to be our own entity.
Here's
Hence the reason for the Electoral College, my friends.
That's right.
Really.
Yeah, the big reason for the Electoral College.
Anything that slows it down, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we don't want L.A. and New York making the decisions for the rest of the country.
Please, no. No.
So they only get so many electoral votes, and it balances out. I mean, there's genius in what was put together. I mean, there's genius.
So in our book, The Last Air Force One, that Jeff and I wrote, we have the U.S. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, kind of accelerated by terrorism, and in this book, it's actually the president and the secretary of state up in the air while America burns, trying to make these decisions. Like, what do we do? And I won't give it away, but the idea is floated. The idea is floated in a potent way. Well, what if we just segregate the United States? Well, let's go ahead. What if we just go ahead and put a cordon around these highly, highly blue counties and keep everybody there and let flyover America keep their guns and do what they want to do. Well, and that's it. But then, you're really talking about socioeconomic eugenics now.
Yeah.
And so then everybody's tore up and trying to figure out, wait a minute, is that the greatest idea ever heard, or is that Adolf Hitler?
People don't,
sure.
This is an interesting discussion. We'll never even have enough time to go into this, but this is interesting to me because when we talk about state rights, and you say things like, well, go to a different state where it jives with how you see things. People are like, well, I shouldn't have to do this, America. Well, what do you want? Do you want state rights? Do you want the America that has state rights and the freedom to choose where to go to make a decision for you and your family where you can thrive in an environment where you feel comfortable and you can support? Or do you want an authoritarian, all states have to abide by everything wherever you are without having to vote, without having to make sacrifices, and all of those sacrifices that were done by our forefathers to make that possible? You want the benefit of that without ever in your life having to make the same difficult decisions.
And they intended each state to be profoundly different from every other. I mean, they intended to localize power as much as possible.
Who's not gonna agree that our federal government is bloated, right? It's gone beyond the intended scope originally. So, but we are where we are at. So, how do we get back? Well, through the same system that we have. Vote them out. Stop it.
Or leave. Or go live somewhere else.
Or go somewhere else
what
was
that meme I just saw? It's like, if America's so horrible, then how come those same people won't leave?
Exactly.
Well, and they can go where they want. You're welcome to go live in Southern California. Go for it. You're gonna, if you're a blue-blooded liberal, you're gonna love it.
Yeah. Go to California.
And you know what? I'll come visit.
Go to New York.
I want to live there.
Go to Seattle.
Well, the other problem is we have a group of people that I think you mentioned, the 3%ers, and there's sovereign citizens, and there's a variety of anarcho-capitalists, and there's a variety of different groups that go by different monikers. But at the end of the day, they're all wishing for a society that doesn't exist. They're like, well, I didn't agree to this. I didn't agree to these laws. Okay, but you were born in a place where these laws exist. So essentially, if we go to the core of it, you're saying, I wish I wasn't born here. Okay, well, then move where you wish you were born.
Yeah.
And when you go there, you're going to realize there's also rules there and laws there that maybe differ from here, but they're not what you just wish it was.
But the flip side of that is we've become, in this country, the thing Ayn Rand, who I don't particularly like, but she apparently was totally right.
A prophetess.
Yeah, I mean, we've become that odious, lukewarm, mediocre society that she prophesied. So today our children are inheriting not the America that we were trying to.
It's because it's our comfort. We have so many comforts right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're not forced to make difficult decisions and forced to thrive. It goes back to what I was saying before. As long as I got this in my hand and I got my latte, everything else doesn't matter. Like, there are heads down, focused on this, and I'm willing to sacrifice everything for that comfort that I want to seek. And I think that's where we're in for an awakening as this sort of like ideologies come to clash as to, are we really willing to even make the difficult decisions,
And we're not. I mean, if you go back to privacy where you started this, I gave up my privacy. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Okay, so Facebook knows what kind of underwear I wear. Whatever. At least they're running great ads.
So what? Amazon listens to everything I say. Whatever.
Whatever. It makes it convenient. I don't see shitty ads. I see great ads. But we have sacrificed. What I'm kind of encouraged by, though, is America really has stood up on firearms. America really has stood up on abortion. I mean, we're not letting that go. We're not walking away from firearms rights either. And I don't think when we get super pissed about the incursions on assault rifles, we forget we did not have a right to buy assault rifles for 10 years there. That came back. Remember the what was that? The assault rifle ban, assault weapons ban, AWB. Yeah. We have way more. We have way more gun rights right now in this moment than we did during the Bush administration. Bush 1
and Clinton.
And Clinton.
Yeah, but Bush 1 was the one that signed it.
But you're right, but now we're fighting actually for rights that in my adult life, for the bulk of my adult life, we didn't have. I mean, and the courts backed that play.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm encouraged by the stand. I don't think we're giving up our firearm rights as easily as we gave up our privacy rights.
I sure hope not. I just think that we could run a parallel about how we get there. Just the same way, if we take it easy on the little things, then I think we're given that inch to what's really amounts to a mile.
And it might have been exactly what happened in Venezuela. I mean, I don't think we know the bouncing ball there that led to them giving up their firearms right, that led to an MRAP running over a whole bunch of civilians. But maybe that. I mean, that's why we prepare. That's why we sit around John about it.
Hey, everybody!
Bunch of old men.
We're out of our time. Thanks so much. We had a blast chatting about this. Keep your comments going. Share this with anybody that might find this of value. And then we also want to hear your thoughts and comments on this as well. Blast us in a question if you find these discussions interesting. You can hit us up on Monday in our closed group, the ReadyMan closed group. Ask for entrance and we'll let you in there. And
same conversations. We avoid politics in the ReadyMan group, but we're talking about preparedness, firearms. So very similar subjects, though we don't necessarily go down the political rabbit holes quite so deep.
And then, of course, if you don't know who Mike is, jump on his channel, Mike the Cop. He's on Facebook and YouTube, and it's great conversations that are going on there with his podcast, as well as he makes a bunch of funny videos as well that kind of bring the humanizing to the police. So, Mike, last words.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm in the presence of mental and physical superiority, and I'm just here.
Thanks, you guys. We'll see you Monday for a whole new live show on in the ReadyMan closed group. Until then, take care.